Greetings. My name is Gray Endres, and I am um, assistant professor at Missouri Western in the School of Health Professions in the Social Work Department. I'm relatively new to Missouri Western. This is beginning my fourth year. Prior to coming to Missouri Western as a full-time faculty, I had served as an adjunct at University of Kansas and UMKC in the social work departments. And I've worked clinically in social work since 1986, primarily with children and families in a variety of settings, including in-home family treatment, private practice, psychiatric, and residential treatment. And most all of my work has been working with kids and child welfare. So the focus of this presentation is my research for my dissertation and capstone project for my DSW at USC. Since my interest is primarily children and families, I worked within the grand challenge, the social work grand challenge of ensuring the healthy development of all youth, given that child welfare is failing to protect the children it's mandated to serve. So in the fall of 2014, I was asked to provide individual therapy to a couple, mom and a dad, who had two teenage daughters, a 15-year-old and a 14-year-old. The 15-year-old was in foster care herself with her infant son. And the goal was reunification of that 15-year-old to come home to the mom and the dad. And my goal was to work with the mom and the dad to get their 15-year-old daughter and grandson home. One Friday afternoon, as I was getting ready to start an in-home family therapy session, I noticed my client, the mom, looking at homecoming dresses with her daughter, who was there on a visit from foster care. And I remember leaning over their shoulders and commenting on how pretty the dresses were. And I asked my client's daughter if she was excited about homecoming. And she looked up from the laptop very slowly and said, with the saddest eyes, that she didn't get to go to homecoming. Her caseworker had told her because she was a new mom, new moms don't get to go to homecoming. At that moment, I was so frustrated. I mean, for those of you watching this presentation, many of you might be parents. You know, how difficult is it to be a parent? I mean, for me, it's been one of the most challenging jobs of my life with my wife. But what about being a single parent? And what about being a single teen parent? Can you imagine the shame that was behind those very sad eyes that I saw that day? So I was pretty frustrated. So let me give you a little bit of information about child welfare. In 2017 and 2018, there were 7,192 kids in foster care in the state of Kansas. This had gone up 7% annually from 2010 to 2017, 7% annually, 7 years in a row. That's a cumulative increase of 49%. Kids were coming into foster care in the state of Kansas much higher than they were leaving foster care. During the course of 1,000 days in foster care, which is roughly 3 years, kids were moving in excess of 9.9 times, going from foster home to group home to psychiatric hospital to foster home. This is more than double the national average for federal guidelines, which is 4.1. And in 2018 and 2019, this spiked to 10.4 times. In Kansas, there were kids sleeping in offices instead of even having placements. The average length of stay is 21 plus months in the state of Kansas. This almost is outside the scope of the Adoption Safe Families Act from 1997, which gives a range of 15 to 22 months. So we're pushing the envelope. That's the average, which means there are a lot of kids that were beyond the federal guidelines for permanency. Can you imagine if you're 4 years old and half your life is in foster care? Of those 7,192 kids in foster care, 75% of them were kids of color. By the way, that number is about 65 to 68% in the state of Missouri, which has between 12 and 13,000 kids in foster care. 75% of the kids are kids of color. In a state where around 8%, 8.4% of the population of Kansas are people of color. Kansas and Missouri, for instance, in most states spend way more money removing kids, investigating abuse, and treating it rather than putting money into prevention. And prevention is proven to be successful. Both Kansas and Missouri have consistently failed over 50% of their child welfare uh, guidelines, including safety, engagement of families and children, stability and placements, timely permanency. You see, we're pushing the envelope at 21 plus months and 9.9 moves. Each one of those moves leads to a new school, to a new placement, to a new foster parent. All of that is more loss, more cutoff, and more trauma for kids. So looking at this problem of child welfare, man, it's a giant problem. I wanted to look at it and to identify norms that were holding this problem into place. And one of the norms that I focused on in my research was this norm called adult centrism. This was first developed by Dr. Chris Petter, who's now a retired um, social work faculty at the University of Kansas. His research looked at the notion that in child welfare, social workers and child welfare workers see themselves as the experts of their clients, that the families are not an expert of their own lives, but workers are an expert. Well, this norm of adult centrism is held in place itself by lesser norms, unconscious bias, blindly following old practices, the need to save the child, confidentiality that supersedes transparency. I was involved in a case right as COVID began in March of 2020, and the state of Missouri removed 3 kids from a single mother, not because her home was dirty or filthy, but because where she was using childcare, that home was deemed unfit. They did not put family preservation in place to help her find new childcare. They just removed the kids and put them in foster care. They did not look at relative placements. And the manual and the policies in Children's Division in Missouri says every time you look at removing a child, you must look at relative care. You must look at family preservation. When the caseworker was asked why she didn't follow these policies, she shrugged her shoulders while she was on the stand and said, well, because of COVID. All of these lesser norms create an orthodoxy, which are unchallenged, deeply held beliefs that create these blind spots. Confidentiality supersedes transparency. We, the public, don't often hear about the failures of child welfare until there's a fatality, and then it's too late. And then even then, we might not get the information. So what's being done to challenge, to give kids and families a voice? Well, unfortunately, not very much. In 1989, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child created this statement that every child has a right to self-determination, dignity, respect, and the right to informed decisions. Unfortunately, the United States, while we helped design this Bill of Rights, the Children's Bill of Rights, we as a country have never signed off on this in the United Nations. In 1999, the Chaffee Youth Panels were developed, where groups of former foster alumni would come together to give feedback on their systems. Los Angeles County didn't start their program until 2020, so 21 years after the youth panels were created. Both Kansas and Missouri have these. Currently, Kansas's advisory panels have been shut down for a number of years now, prior to Governor Kelly coming into office. On the Missouri side, the panels are chaired by the Children's Division, and they only select kids who have positive things to say about their experiences. So while there is a voice, it's a very one-sided voice. In 2014, the Ann Casey Foundation decided to create an initiative to make team decision-making a best practice initiative, but unfortunately that effort has not proven to be fruitful. In 2017, Governor Greitens signed into law the Foster Children's Bill of Rights, which says 14-year-olds and up have a right to attend court and have a voice. But I know so many cases where kids are not allowed in the courtroom. They're not allowed to attend their family support team meetings. So while this is an outstanding piece of legislation, where's the accountability? How do we hold the systems accountable to it? And then you have COVID occurring. You have Kids at home, you have increased financial strains on the families. You have people losing their jobs, an increase in child abuse, a decrease in child abuse reporting. No kids in schools. Majority of child abuse reportings come out of schools because kids feel safe in their school environment. They're able to talk to their teachers, and we've seen less child abuse reporting, while we've seen an increase in domestic violence and substance use. This all leads to no voice. Kids really just don't have a voice in child welfare. So I've, through my research, created this intervention called Operation Hope. The focus is to give kids a voice. This operation was grounded in some research pieces, three of them. The first is shared decision making. The second is empowerment theory supported by diffusion of innovation. And the third is the power of a comic book. So shared decision making is something probably many of you listening to this presentation, you have participated in this. Your doctor says, I think your blood pressure is a little high. We can either, lose a little weight, increase your activity, or we could take this medication. And then you, as the patient, you're able to participate in that discussion with your doctor and make a decision. So we see shared decision making as a best practice in healthcare, just not child welfare, and rarely in mental health. There are a couple models. Feedback informed treatment, which was designed by Barry Duncan and Scott Miller. It gave immediate feedback to the provider, to the facilitator of therapy, on if the client felt heard. Have we been working on what I wanted to work on? How was my method as a clinician? And overall, how did the session work? This model is an excellent model. It's proven to be very effective. Also, we look at what's called major versus minor decision making. There was a research study done in Ontario in an oncology unit with youth who were getting cancer treatment. A major decision would be, I don't want cancer treatment. So the kids were not allowed to make major decisions. But when they were allowed to make minor decisions, they found that their participation in treatment, increased. Things like, what shows they wanted to watch while getting their chemo. Did they want chemo in the morning, or did they rather have it in the afternoon? Making minor decisions and being able to participate in the treatment process. So here's some examples of minor decision making for kids. I want to be placed in a home with pets. I miss my dog. Man, when kids get removed, if they have a dog, they don't get visitations to see their dogs. I want to see my old friends. I miss my old neighborhood. I miss my old school. I want to play on a basketball team. Frequently, when kids come into foster care, if they were in scouts or dance or photography or ballet or sports, those things don't travel with them. So the research is very supportive of shared decision making to increase engagement, stability, trust, and hope, and participation. Next is the power of empowerment and diffusion. I think you're probably all familiar with Malala. She was the Nobel Prize winner in 2014 after she was shot in the head for going to school in 2012. Her word is so powerful, her message is spread across the entire globe. You're probably also familiar with Greta Thunberg, who was the Time Person of the Year in 2019 for her position on climate change. How about Emma Gonzalez? She was one of the survivors of the Parkland, Florida shooting. Her Twitter account, she has more followers than the NRA. So these youth have demonstrated the power of being empowered and having a voice, and how their message has diffused across the United States, across the globe, from one continent to the next, and how powerful that can be. And third is the power of comic books. Yeah, I'm a big fan of comic books. If you ever come visit me in my office at Missouri Western, I have some on display in my office that are meaningful to me. So in Operation Hope, originally you're going to see the pilots and how my pilots evolved, but we're not quite there yet. But the goal is to define an innovation that will touch the lives of 10 to 18-year-olds that are in foster care. So the comic book that I've designed, the main character, Levi and Maria. Levi is a middle schooler. And so we designed the book for 10 to 18-year-olds. 10, 11, and 12-year-olds are looking forward to middle school. They're excited about that. And then, of course, the 16 and 17-year-olds, they remember what it was like to be in middle school. So they can connect with, Levi and Maria. So here's a couple examples of comic books and the power of comic books. This is a book, The Martin Luther King Montgomery Story, which was published in 1957. About 250,000 copies were published. It's very hard to find a real copy of this. Many of them were destroyed. It taught the reader how to peacefully protest. Congressman John Lewis of Georgia, Rosa Parks, and the Woolworth Four all shared in their memoirs and biographies how this comic book taught them and empowered them to peacefully protest and to get in a little good trouble, as Congressman Lewis would say. Here's a more recent example. This is Faith. Faith is a superhero in the Valiant universe. Valiant is like Marvel or DC, if you're not familiar with Valiant. Faith was an orphan herself. She has an ability to fly. And in this book, it's a one-shot collaboration with the Keep Abreast Foundation. And in this book, Faith goes with her friend who has a lump on her breast, and she learns about the power of breast self-examinations. Because the Keep Abreast Foundation, their message is that you shouldn't worry about your breast health just when you turn 40. You should be thinking about it as adolescence and as a 20-year-old. And so Faith became the spokesperson in a very powerful one-shot comic book. So Operation Hope is ready to go. The first comic book's done, and you're going to see sort of the journey of that. It is implementation ready. I am partnering in a pilot and to be able to do my research with CASA. I selected CASA, well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, they have expert power, and their mission is to be the voice of children in court. And the mission of Operation Hope is to teach kids in child welfare how to have a voice. So we have a shared mission. So our goal is to do a pilot with Jackson County CASA, as well as CASA in Manhattan, Kansas, that would touch the lives of about 500 CASA volunteers and about 4,000 children. Now, originally in designing this innovation, it was not a comic book, it was something else. And I'm going to share with you that journey here in a bit. But one of the things is that I don't have an ability to specifically touch the life of a child in child welfare. They are a very protected, marginalized group, but CASA volunteers do. So can I teach CASA volunteers the power of the voice, the shared decision-making, and have them in turn teach their clients? So the goals and objectives of Operation Hope is to disrupt the norm of adult centrism, and that 80% of the CASA volunteers will demonstrate an increased understanding and have a favorable opinion of shared decision-making. My logic model is designed on inputs, activities, and outcomes. I want to build, measure, and learn. It needs to be a flexible design, constant customer feedback. During this research, the pre-research, developing the innovation, developing the tool, I've been in constant contact with child welfare experts, child welfare workers, former child welfare alumni, interviewing them face-to-face, phone, Zoom, looking with other researchers, other academic professionals, professors, comic book designers, artists, comic book publishers across the United States. And one of the things that I learned early on was it's okay to fail, but you want to fail early and fail fast. And I did so in the beginning. Using the ERIC model for implementing my project, as I shared, phase one's ready, the comic book's ready to go, and I'm going to share a little bit of that with you in a minute. We're going to conduct initial trainings with quantitative and qualitative research. We're going to use mass media in public discourse to promote the innovation, and work with educational institutions to develop train the trainer strategies. But there will be some barriers along the way: outer and inner context, political issues, funding sources. Again, I don't have direct contact with children, and always that inherent bias. So looking at my model, it's going to be a mixed method evaluation with quantitative and qualitative. I'm going to use a non-probability purposeful sample. The CASA volunteers are convenient and easy to access. I want to use a visual analog, a short Likert scale that has two distinct possibilities. Here's an example of two questions on the tool. Children ages 10 to 18 being served in child welfare should be included in decision making. Do you disagree? Do you agree? Or are you somewhere in the middle? Children ages 10 to 18 are experts on themselves. Again, do you disagree? Do you agree? Visual analogs are easy to score and they limit social desirability, but even they also have some internal validity threats. This perceived golden era. The person that's filling out the research tool may think I want to see them score in such a way. So there's that bias and that validity threat. Certainly some instrumentation design. I have to think about the wording of my questions, and that's gone through several phases, and my committee chair helped me and my research professors helped me fine tune that. Public discourse, I want to use a 70-20-10 rule. 70% of my public discourse is to build the brand. 20% is to use the brand to give shared information, and only 10% of direct promotion. Here's an example of shared content. Here's Levi talking about Operation Mask 19 in regards to COVID-19, because there's a decrease in reports of child welfare. So at the bottom, you see the credit goes to Operation Hope. Let's give kids a voice. Here's another example. This is an infographic, COVID-19, the perfect storm. You see Dorothy and you see the tornado. Disrupted family schedules, high levels of unemployment, financial strain, no school equals an increased risk of child abuse. So an infographic put out by Operation Hope. Here's another example of an infographic. In 2017, there were 7,000 kids in child welfare, and those in a survey that were able to have a voice, only about 55%. By the way, they only surveyed about 150 kids, and they were ages 15 to 17. So my comic books are going to cost. That's obviously part of implementation plan. I have worked out a deal with an artist after interviewing multiple artists and authors. It's about $6,000 per comic. There's going to be 3 comics. The goal eventually is to create a trade paperback. It's going to have built-in activities for the reader to use with the children and to teach them how to use this book. So it could be therapists, it could be caseworkers, it could be CASA volunteers, it could be teachers, it could be nurses. This book in the end will be able to touch a wide variety of people. Of course, publishing is going to be about $36,000. So there's a need of $54,000. One of the interesting things about social services is that when you take a finance and a business class in social services, one of the things you learn is not to put all your funding into one basket, all your eggs in one basket. So there's important to have a diverse funding stream. There are grants that I can go for, advertising. If you've not seen a comic book, they're filled with ads for movies, ads for Legos, ads for restaurants, for Wendy's, for McDonald's. So going out and getting maybe Wendy's Wonderful Kids is a program through Wendy's Cheeseburgers. Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's, was a huge, supporter of adoption issues and child welfare issues. And certainly some donations and even some crowdsource. Could I do a Kickstarter and the person signing up for the Kickstarter get a digital copy of the comic book, get maybe some hand-drawn panels. So here's Levi and Maria, as I've mentioned their names a couple times. Levi is Hispanic. He is in foster care. He's in middle school. He meets Maria, who is an African-American girl who's also in foster care in the first book. The artist that I've selected is Todd DeMonte. He's from Hannibal, Missouri. I met him at a comic book show and sat down and interviewed with him, pitched my idea using a journey map. And you can see his work. It's very colorful, very whimsical. And I was feeling, because such a serious topic, I wanted something that was colorful and whimsical. So my initial innovation was not a comic book. I wanted to use a superhero, and I wanted to take something like Angie's List or Rate My Professor and develop an app where kids who were in the system could log in and, using gamification, the theory of game theory, create a superhero character who runs around solving missions, earning badges and points, and being able to share about their experiences in child welfare and rate their caseworker and rate their family court experience. Unfortunately, I was told no by multiple people, including several people on my committee. But the final straw was CASA, and CASA said no. They liked the idea of a superhero. And so while I was pitching the prototype, they said to me, why not a comic book? So from there, the comic book was developed. Here's an example of my journey map. You can see there are two sections, section 1 and section 2. Section 1 is the problem of child welfare, and then section 2 has two spurs. The first one is the shared mission to CASA, and the third one is the funding, the story, and the art to develop the comic book. And then the comic book will disrupt the norm, leading to kids with voices, increased engagement, increased stability, increased hope. And I want to see my dog. So here I am pitching a very early storyboard at residency at USC in Los Angeles. You can see the hand coming down to cover the mouth of the child. That hand is the hand of child welfare within the grand challenge of healthy development of all youth. He's supported up by his support system, by family, by macro practice, meso practice, best practice, and the voice. And as I pitched that, I continued to evolve the prototype. You'll see now we have a youth reading the comic book Operation Hope, and he's got these thought bubbles around him. Again, I miss my dog, I miss my old school. There's no one that looks like me in my foster home. And then while pitching that to different people, I continued to get feedback and continued to evolve it. Now over on the right, you can see Finding My Voice. You can see a boy reading a comic book with the thought bubbles, but now you hear him say, hey, I'm not alone. Maybe there's some hope out there, and that's pretty exciting. Here's the continued evolution of Finding My Voice. You see the green strip over the mouth. Again, we're back to that hand covering the mouth. Then we changed the colors, and then now we've added some text at the bottom, learning to speak up for yourself. You've got Levi's hairdo. Here's a panel where Levi meets Maria, and Maria pulls him up. He's been bullied down in between some seats on the bus, and she pulls him up. I love the way the colors flow. You can see Todd's art and why I think it's a hit. It's very readable. This is a 2-page spread that will open up, and then we'll read from left to right on the left side and then over on the right side. Very powerful panel. On this panel, you see my thought bubbles coming into play here. Todd's using them. Why can't I just go home? What do I have to go to court again? I miss my dog this time. But then you just hear the foster parent saying, hey, dinner's ready. But he's got all these wild ideas in his head. Oh, what do they want now? Am I leaving? And then now you see in another panel, those thought bubbles have turned into speech. Hey, my name is Levi. I have a sister. Blue's my favorite color. I like pizza. Again, the power of the voice. Very cool panel. This is the Star Wars panel. You see Levi saying to someone who's just bullied him on the bus, please move back to where you were and quit bullying me. And I love this Star Wars panel up here on the right. It was as if all of the oxygen was sucked out of the bus, and everyone was amazed that the quiet kid stood up to the bully, and they waited to see what would happen next. And you see the eyes of the bus driver. They're like, woo, this big, powerful panel. And here Levi is talking about your voice is a sword. It can be used to hurt, but it can be used for good. But silence is the enemy. So in conclusion, we're going to use the power of diffusion, empowerment theory, shared decision-making, the power of the comic book, and an innovative theory designed to disrupt the norm of adult centrism to give kids a voice in child welfare. And I'm fairly confident this will work, and I'm excited to move on to phase 2 to further my research, get the funding to publish the book, and then in turn do the research with CASA. So my next step, there's other things to consider. What about translating into other languages? Planning for ages 5 to 9, because I didn't plan for that. What about parents? What about kids who can't read? An audiobook. How do I include foster alumni contributions? Maybe there's a section in the back of the book of letters to the editor from former foster alumni sharing how they learned to have their voice. But again, there's going to be barriers and challenges. CASA could withdraw from my pilot before I ever get started or in the middle. Financial issues, problems securing timely funding. And in conclusion, you remember that dance that my client didn't get to go to? Well, the next day I reached out to her guardian ad litem who was through CASA and shared what the caseworker had said to her. And CASA and I got her a new caseworker. And CASA bought her a dress and she went to homecoming. And we were able to be her voice that day. But I can't be the voice of every child in child welfare. In Kansas, there's 7,000. In Missouri, there's 13,000. But can we teach them to use their own voice? The legislation's already in place. It says they have a right to have a voice. So it's time to make kids into heroes, time to give kids a voice and teach them how to have that voice. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today and joining me in this journey. And I hope that you gain something new out of this. Again, thank you so much.